Kia ora tātou, tēnā tātou, just testing sound. Kia ora.
There you go.
Kia ora tātou. Just before our karakia, can I ask you, Maud, if you can help us with a health and safety briefing for our whare there?
Amber, would you be able to provide a brief, please?
Ai, kaitopai. Kia ora koutou katoa. Ko e marakerake tōku ingoa, ko marae nui aramoana tōku hua rangatira. I'm here today to tautoko our hui with all of our whānui. Just before we get our hui underway, a couple of health and safety briefs. Anyone needing to use the wharepaku? It's out by reception, so just past the reception desk and to your left. Our emergency fire exits in case of an evacuation, just to the back of the room here. There's also another door directly out in the foyer to your right, and of course this entrance here to my left. We'd also like people to be mindful if you could please turn your mobile devices to silent or vibrate, so that we don't have any interruptions during our hui. We have a couple of first aid people on site if anyone requires any health or attention for any serious conditions. And also, I'd just like to take this opportunity to remind all of our whānau that are here today, this is a really important hui for all of us, and to encourage our whānau to participate in a respectful manner. We just want to encourage everyone to participate, have their kōrero, hear the information that all of our respective parties here have to share with us today. But if you do need to share something, ask any pātai, please let's keep this a safe space for all of our whānau, our kaumātua. We have tamariki present, so again, respectfully. In the event that kawa is broken, you will be invited to leave, and if necessary, which we'd like to avoid, you will be escorted from the premises. Kia ora.
One more thing. Just one more thing. So as you can see, Leo, our facilitator, is online. That's due to him not being able to make it because of the fog. So thank you to Gecko Productions for trying to rig this up this morning at the 12th hour. So if there's any technical difficulties, it is not through the fault of our production team. I'd just like to make that clear to the whānau at home and to whānau here today. And they've done their best to get it to where it is now, so Leo can carry on and do his mahi. Kia ora koutou.
Tēnā koutou.
Koe to tātou na piringa tōna tēnā kai whakaoro. E te kake whakanui a tōna i oe ngā mākatu. Te whai korori ai tōna i oe tau. Ko ki manu, ke wa tātou ngā mate. Ngā mate te wākai mai ngā kuria pāle ki te hirau. Me ngā mate anō kai ko nei, i roto i tāmaki nei, i wangani ngā whānau e noha ana i ko nei. Tēnā te mihi ki o tātou ngā mate. Nā te mea kua hui hui i tātou i ko nei, i roto i tēnei whore. Ki au kua tūtake ngā mate ki ngā mate. Ka ki au, ka ea te wāhi ki a rātou. Ko ke mai ki a tātou, nā mate haere. Oki mai, mai te moe rua. He koutou. Ko ke mai ki a tātou te hungaura. He mihi tēnei ki ngā ki te kai whakawā. Ka haere te kaupapa ki a Leo, Watson. Ki ngā kaumātua te Whakatohea, ngā kaupapa haere. I ngā kaupapa o te Whakatohea, anō hoki ki te mākainga. Ki ngā roia, ki te karauna. Anō hoki ki a tātou katoa e tau nei i roto i tēnei whare o tātou. Ai runga te kaupapa kai mue o tātou nā roaro. Ana e pāna ki ngā pati. Ka rea tō rohi a ngā kōrero kai te haere te wā, e poto te wā. Ka rāpopoto hea waku kōrero i konei. Ka mihi atu, huri no, tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou. Tēnā tātou katoa.
Whakatūtera whate te wāne ngaro. Tēnei tō tātou rā hāpati, tēnā koe. Tēnā koe te aro moana mō whakatau mai. Ai a tātou katoa i runga i tēnei, i roto i tēnei whare o tātou. Ko whakamarahia i tēnei rā hei wānanga i te kaupapa kai mui a tātou. Nō reira, tēnā koe te upukorehe. Tēnā hoki tātou te Whakatohea. Whakahonore tō tātou kingi a kingi tūheichi a pōtatau te wherowhero te tūwhitu. E nō nā i runga i tahu rewa tapu. Kei konei tātou kei te kai o tainui. Nō reira tangi hi o tātou ma te tuhunga. Kua riro ki te pō. Nā rātau i waha te kaupapa nei. O tirā. Tērā o tātou mōrewi kuia i āni tuatua. Takoto i roto o Ngāti Hāmua, ki roto o Ngāti Koura, o tira tūhoi. Me ki pēnei mai ngā kuria whare ki tihirau. Mō kau ki runga tāmaki ki raro, mga tōtua ki wainga nui, tēnei tātou e taunei. Nō reira, ngā mate haere, haere, haere. Hoki mai ki a tātou, nā kai whakawā, nā kai whakahaere i a tātou nāmana, Māora, tēnā koe. Tēnā hoki tātou e taunei, Māui. Nō reira, kia tēnei tātou e whainei kia mau te kotahitanga o te wairua he mea paihere nā te rangi Māori. Nō reira, kāre kumea rohi e te kōrera hoi no mihi ake ki o tātou pakeke. O tātou kau mātua e noho nei. A tātou tamariki, a tātou mokopuna. E nawa koutou, te puni kōkiri. Whakahaere nei te kaupapa i runga i ngā tikanga o te kaupapa nei. Nō reira kāre kumea rohi e te kōrero, me te mihi ki te ātāhu o te waiata. Ka pai. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā hoki tātou katoa. Tērā te ahi te kā mai rā, kai nuku wai. Nā tōri ngā rawa koe, i tahu mai. Kia mihi atu au horo nā tō kau mai. Hei toko rua, hei hoa ke ki te moenga. E tūahu nei. Kia ora tātou. Kei e te wahine nāna te mira.
Tēnā tātou. Tēnā tātou i ngā āhuatanga o tēnei te mihi whakatau. Nō reira, kei te mihi atu ki a koutou. Kei te tautoko ngā mihi kua mihi. I roto i tēnei kaupapa whakahirahira. Nō reira, a koutou mā. Koutou e huihu mai ki tāmaki. Koutou e whakarongo mai ana. Mai rungi te pai hono. Tēnei te mihi atu ki a koutou katoa. My name is Leo Watson. I have been asked by the parties involved in this hui to act as a facilitator. I'm based down in Napier and I have a legal experience over 25 years in working in the Treaty of Waitangi field, including mandating. It's an honour to be able to assist you today and for the hui that have been held around the motu. I am not a member of the Crown. The Crown is represented here in their capacity and they will give a presentation to you during the hui. I have a number of preliminary matters to work through and then I'll hand it over to our speakers as part of their presentations. Firstly, if I can just get a wave from the room that you can hear me okay. Is that coming through? Thank you. Firstly, the attendance register is very important. Please make sure that you have completed the attendance register for this hui. Secondly, to note that the hui today is being streamed and also recorded. And that stream would be available on a YouTube link for those of your whānau and hapu who wish to listen either live or later. The pānui about voting is very important. two things to note. Firstly, we have a representative there from elections.com. I think it's Isaiah. If Isaiah is in the room, can you please wave out or stand up? Kia ora, thank you. Isaiah and the elections.com team can help with any voting issues that you have, including any registrations you may wish to complete. There is a ballot box in Te Hui that is available for you to cast your votes today, or you can just go up and talk to their representatives about any issues you may have about registration or voting. Voting continues to be open until 30 August, 12 p.m. 30 August. And you can cast your votes also by way of online and by post. Isaiah, if you wish to have comment on this issue after I've gone through the slide, feel free to just come up to the mic and tell me, but I'll take the hui through the information shortly that you have provided. There are also hard copies of the information booklet available in the whare there. And if you want to take some for your whānau, please do so. There are further hui to come. There is a hui tomorrow in Napier. Then when we have one in online as well, and one in Wellington. The next take has been traversed already by our speaker at the commencement of our hui, just in terms of how we wish to engage with you who are listening and wish to participate with your questions. That is, for me, the most important part of this hui, where you hear the information and have a chance to have your kōrero and ask your questions. I ask for your cooperation to do that respectfully. I ask that you hāngai ki te kaupapa. Keep to the kaupapa of what we're here for today, which is questions and clarification from the speakers about the Te Upokorehe petition and their request to withdraw from the deed of mandate. For those who are answering the questions, I ask that you also stick to the question, and so that we can get through today as efficiently as possible. When you ask a question, and there will be plenty of time for that, please raise your hand and just allow our tech team to come over and provide a mic to you. Please, please, don't start talking with your question until you have the mic in your hand, because it makes it so much harder for people to hear you, either online or part of the recording. In terms of our hui today, I'm going to go through very briefly some slides as to how we got here. Then Te Upokorehe representatives will give their presentation. Then we'll hear from Te Arawhiti from the Crown. And then the Whakatohea Pre-Settlement Claims Trust will give their presentation. At that point, there will be a question and answer session, which I will facilitate. I have been told that the hui today, with our catering and support staff, have asked that the hui conclude around 12:40 for kai. Now that's earlier than I had expected, and I think that we just need to be flexible. But certainly if we can aim for a 12:40 conclusion, we will do so. However, if the conversation is continuing and there are important questions, then I think that needs to take precedence. So let's just help each other and let me know how we're going in the room in terms of that time frame. Can I ask that the slides be put up, please, on the screen, that I can just talk to the timeline of how we got here today. Essentially, there was a deed of mandate signed in 2016, which included Te Upokorehe. Then we had an agreement in principle signed in 2017, and of course then there was the mandate inquiry in the Waitangi Tribunal. Their report was released in 2018. There was continuation of negotiations through 18. Upokorehe, we see there on the slide there, voted against. The Crown agreed to a parallel process, and ultimately in 2020 there was an urgent inquiry in the Waitangi Tribunal concerning those negotiations and the deed of mandate. That report from the tribunal was released in 2021, and at that point, Te Upokorehe petitioners submitted their petition to withdraw from the deed of mandate. That triggers a series of hui, which is what we're holding today. Can I go to the next slide, please? What is mandating? Essentially, as you well know now probably, the claimant group seeking to settle with the Crown chooses the representatives who will have the authority to enter into those discussions and agreement with the Crown. And so the Whakatohea Pre-Claims Settlement Trust is that group of representatives who have the mandate recognised in 2016. As part of that mandate, they have an accountability mechanism which is built in to allow a hapu to withdraw from that process with sufficient support to do so. Next slide, please. The deed of settlement, which has been agreed but is yet to be ratified by Whakatohea, has been negotiated by that trust, and it seeks to settle the historical claims of those hapu that are listed there. That's going to be discussed in more detail as part of the presentations. So there's only one step left, that's the ratification process, and before that happens, the Te Upokorehe petition, which seeks to withdraw from the mandate, should be conducted by way of a series of hui and resolved. So the next slide, please, which is headed up process under the deed to withdraw. A petition is required, which requires 5% of the adult members of Te Whakatohea. That, as I understand it, was satisfied. Then there was a meeting between the Pre-Settlement Claims Trust and the petitioners, and then at least 5 publicly notified hui have to be held, and we are up to hui number 3. There is a voting process, so these hui are for information purposes and clarification, and then you have a chance to vote either by way of post or online. Please record the primary hapu affiliation as you vote. What happens then? Well, the petitioners themselves present a written report to the Claims Trust and to the Crown, and then those parties decide on whether the mandate should be changed or whether the process continues to ratification. The next slide, please. Elections NZ have given us this information, which I've summarised. I'll just leave that up on the screen for the moment. You'll see the free phone number there, some email addresses, and the website. All of the parties are concerned to make sure you have every support available to participate, to register, and to cast your vote. So please make sure that you take note of that information and ask for assistance if you require it. I'm now going to ask the representatives from Te Upokorehe petitioners to present their kōrero. I ask for you, as those who are listening, to give them the respectful time to get through their presentation. No interruptions, please, or huffing and puffing. Let them just get through their presentation in a respectful manner. There will be plenty of time for you to ask questions of them. Nā reira, ko tēnei te mihi ati kia koutou, te upokorehe, kai a koutou te wā.
I te whānau o te upokorehi, me te Whakatohea. He mihi atu ki a tau. Katoa, there's a bit of an echo. Ko kahu kori beika tōku ingoa, ko te upokorehi me te Whakatohea o kui iwi. How are we going on the slides there, Mai? While they're just doing that, I'd like to also add my voice to what Amber said. We know that these are really important issues for a lot of our whānau, that these are real issues, and people are feeling really emotional about this because they are real issues. So we also are concerned that this process is taking a toll on the health and well-being of our whānau, so we also need to factor that in as well. And clearly the Upukarehi petitioners do have a different view on their primary whakapapa and on the status of Te Upukarehi. They also believe that that is not the purpose or the focus of this hui. Our kaumātua have advised us that that kōrero takes place in the kōrero tukuiho hearing, and that today we are looking at the mandate and Upukarehi withdrawing from the mandate. Kia ora. Next slide. We're here today because Upukarehi do not want to lose what they currently have. We believe that under the mandate Upukarehi, under the settlement Upukarehi will be worse off. This process is clearly about the Upukarehi rangatiratanga, and the Crown has worked against Te Upukarehi since 2010, firstly in the Tūhoe settlement and now in the Whakatohea settlement. We know that the Crown and the WPCT want to finalise the settlement and to say Upukarehi is part of that group, and that's triggered this process. Upukarehi want to withdraw, and that's the purpose of the withdrawal clause in the mandate. The whole point about that is it provides for accountability. It provides for any group covered by the mandate to hold the settling body accountable. And this is Te Upukarehi's way of doing that, because Te Upukarehi want to withdraw because they do not believe the Pre-Settlement Claims Trust has represented their interests. So I want to make that point because this is part of the process. It isn't Upukarehi being villains, which is what some of the portrayal has been. It is part of a process. Next slide. So we filed the petition in November 21 with 718 petitioners. And that was verified with 682 in a meeting with the Pre-Settlement Claims Trust in Upukarehi at Waimata Marae. And these hui are a result of that. They're a result of that verification process. There has been a lack of clarity around that process. You could see that we didn't know what the 5% threshold was till May. And there was a lot of lack of clarity around how to trigger this process, and quite a few of the Whakatohea groups were also in a similar position. So it was really unclear, and it was also unclear at the hearing. I believe you raised that, Jason. You also mentioned that it's difficult to forecast what the outcome might be if a hapu seeking to withdraw the coverage of the mandate over them voted in favour of withdrawal, but the vote of the iwi as a whole was not supportive. So that was also on the table at the tribunal urgency hearing. Next slide. This is what the petition actually stated. The Crown and the Settlement Claims Trust plan to initial the settlement. The voice of Upukarehi is not heard in this. Upukarehi iwi is not heard in the settlement. A whakapapa and claims are distinct. Upukarehi object to being swept into the settlement as part of Te Whakatohea. We object to Te Upukarehi whenua and sacred sites being given to Whakatohea as part of their settlement, and Te Upukarehi iwi want to stand on our own mana and have the Crown engage directly with us about our whenua and our wahitapu. Next slide. The petition then said urgent action is required. We are asking all those who whakapapa to Te Upukarehi to join our petition to show the Crown that Whakatohea does not have our permission or agreement to act for Upukarehi. By signing this petition, you will be telling the Crown you want Upukarehi iwi, its claims, its whenua and sacred sites removed from the Whakatohea settlement. Thanks, Santana. So then the Crown and the Pre-Settlement Claims Trust meet to discuss next steps. Upukarehi doesn't. That's what the Crown and the Pre-Settlement Claims Trust do to decide whether Upukarehi is withdrawn or not. If we are not withdrawn, then we go to ratification. After the result of the vote is known, the petitioners must present a report, and there it says what the report must contain: copies of public notices, and as the facilitator has raised, attendance registers. Please fill out the attendance register. It's important we get that filled out, minutes and other related information. So the impact of amending the mandate. Well, for us, the petition was the last resort. The petitioners have put their faith in us, and we are completing that process. We believe it is for the Crown to lay out the detail of what those impacts might be, but we believe the settlement will leave Upukarehi worse off. Upukarehi currently exercise kaitiakitanga in our rohi. There's no other body or entity over the top of Upukarehi. We also reject the many half-truths in some of the kōrero coming up, and you get those when kōrero was taken out of context. And unfortunately, they turn into half-truths and sound bites when you don't actually have a report. Now, Upukarehi is heading to the Ngā Kōrero Tuku Iho hearing, and we believe that's the place where the full truth can be laid out. We also do not accept that removing Upukarehi from the mandate will suddenly redefine everybody's whakapapa. What it will do is challenge Whakatohea to look at their claimant definition. That was not our claimant definition. We had another way to go through this, which I'll talk about later. But there has been a lot of heat about Upukarehi exercising their right to withdraw, redefining Whakatohea, and I want to put out today that it's not the case. Next slide, Santana. So what is the yes vote about? Well, it's about being removed from the settlement. Upukarehi have been trying to be removed from the settlement for some time. I think in 2015, 380 Upukarehi people signed a petition to be removed from the settlement. In 2016, 425 people signed. And then in the full vote in 2018, it was 208 in favour of coming out and about 148 to stay in. Next slide. So you've got voting packs that are coming out to you, and please talk to Elections New Zealand. There's also a whakapapa form for those who aren't on the Whakatohea Māori Trust Board roll. That form is for special votes. Fill out as much as you can. It won't be placed on any register or held by either Upukarehi or Whakatohea. And if you have any questions, ask ENZ. And that's the resolution we're asking everybody to vote on, that the Whakatohea Pre-Settlement Claims Trust mandate should be amended to exclude Upukarehi and their claims from the Whakatohea settlement for historical treaty claims. A yes vote will clearly tell the Crown and the Pre-Settlement Claims Trust the Pre-Settlement Claims Trust cannot speak for Upukarehi. Next slide. So what are the problems with the settlement? We believe the historical grievances are largely unaddressed. The Crown has failed to protect the rangatiratanga of Upukarehi. That's been going on for some decades and generations. We have issues around the whakapapa. There are individual groups rangatiratanga under the settlement. We've got issues around that. The Upukarehi whenua are being used, and the fact the historical account is flawed and rushed. Next one. So what are the grievances? Well, they're not just land grievances, that's why that slide's been changed, it's grievances. The Crown invaded the Upukarehi rohi, committed violence and atrocities against our people. Those are still, as you all know, very live and unaddressed. At the same time, they settled Ngāi Tūhoi and other individuals on confiscated Upukarehi lands. Now just think about that. They confiscate the lands and they settle other people upon it, individuals from other iwi. So when it came to the creation of the Hiwaro Reserve, ostensibly for the Upukarehi tribe, individuals were put in there who weren't Upukarehi. The same with the Hokianga Reserve created for the Upukarehi hapu. Some individuals were put in there who were not Upukarehi. And that's because the Crown was trying to curry favour with neighbouring iwi to get their support to hunt Korti. That's why they did this. And our women received only half shares. And then Upukarehi was designated as a hapu in the Ōpapi Reserve, when Upukarehi never lived there and were a tribe in their own right. Now Upukarehi was seen as waiwai tarewa by the Upukarehi chief Weakiaki. And as our kaumātua have told us, when the treaty was going to be signed, he went on a hikoi to talk to Upukarehi wherever they were living about this enormous thing before us, called Te Tiriti o Waitani. He came back, and what did he find? That while he was away seeking support from Upukarehi to sign the treaty, various individual members of Whakatohea had sold his land to the Church Missionary Society. And as a recompense, they tried to give him land at Ōpapi, and he said no, those lands are Waiwai Tarewa lands. So we roll on 20 years into the 1860s, the Crown tries to go there, using that and intermarriage to place us there. Upukarehi never went there, they've never lived there as a hapu. If there were Upukarehi people living there, our whānau say they were intermarried with Whakatohea. So in our view, the Crown is continuing to use confiscated Upukarehi lands to provide redress to both Ngāi Tūhoe and now to Whakatohea. Next slide, please. So the scenario of continuing to not protect the rangatiratanga of Te Upukarehi, we've got the Trust Board. And before I even talk about that, I want to raise the two petitions that Upukarehi signed in the 1930s to open up the title of Hiwarai. And what were they told? No, the land is confiscated land. The Crown can put whoever they like on that land. And that has been the whole approach from the Crown to Te Upukarehi lands up to today. So it's little wonder Te Upukarehi lobbied alongside Whakatohea for the compensation in the 40s and 50s. And as a consequence, the Trust Board was established and Upukarehi were declared to be members of the Whakatohea tribe through legislation. The Whakatohea Māori Trust Board cannot and does not represent 4 out of the 5 hapu of the Upukarehi tribe. And the post-settlement governance entity just makes that worse. Upukarehi will have 2 out of that should be 16, 2 out of 16 seats, and they can be easily outvoted on any major decision regarding their lands. Next slide, please. Yes. Upukarehi want a historical Waitangi tribunal hearing for obvious reasons, for some of the things we've talked about today. The Upukarehi Tribal Landscape Report is currently being commissioned, yet negotiations are taking place amid a real lack of historical fact and knowledge about Te Upukarehi. A lot of what is there has been told by people who have been commissioned by either the Crown or by cross-claimants, and they haven't talked to the Upukarehi. The Upukarehi story is yet to be told and has been held very dear by our knowledge holders for that reason. And yet the Crown is making decisions about Upukarehi without any of these facts before them. It's progressing in haste, and it means that the Waitangi Tribunal cannot make recommendations on their findings. Santana? So we're told that Upukarehi are primarily required to identify as Whakatohea. To park the primary identity and whakapapa to the side, to have a 2 out of 16 say in the Upukarehi ancestral lands. We have whānau who do not identify as Whakatohea. We have whānau who do not whakapapa to the Whakatohea lines. But they do for Upukarehi. And currently, as I mentioned, we do exercise kaitiakitanga over Ārohi. There is no other entity or group that does that. So we believe this significantly impacts on Upukarehi identity, and it certainly limits Upukarehi from continuing to exercise the rangatiratanga and kaitiaki over our taonga. Santana? So there's approximately 39 Upukarehi sites from Marae Tōtara to the Waiweka, including the big Whakatohea Reserve, and we all know also included is Toki, which Upukarehi excavated with archaeologists. So there's 39 of them going into an entity with 2 out of 16 votes for Upukarehi. Next slide. Well, can groups benefit individually under the settlement? That's about the level of the benefit. A legal entity can be established, but it has to be approved by the governance entity, and that approval has to be by unanimous resolution. So Te Upukarehi have to accept they're a group of Whakatohea, and this may very well exclude Upukarehi who don't identify as Whakatohea. It also requires the consent of the Minister of Conservation, and this entity can only administer the whenua. They don't get it, they administer it. And the properties are those outlined in the deed. Next one. The issues with the historical account, well, the research is really rushed. It doesn't reflect Upukarehi history. We believe the Waitangi report will do that. The position is Te Upukarehi is an iwi in our own right, do not belong in the Ngāi Tūhoe settlement, do not belong in the Whakatohea settlement. We've always said we will walk alongside and work alongside Whakatohea, but not under Whakatohea. There have been 4 attempted facilitations. All else having failed, this petition was the last resort. So we established the Pukerehi Treaty Claims Trust to protect the rohi. That's why it was established. And there's some of our trustees, initial trustees, with their members, whānau. Also protested against the Tūhoe settlement because that was taking our lands. Next slide. And against the Whakatohea settlement because that was taking our lands. And there's a slide there that says Crown sells out to Upukerehi for the 4th time. Well, if you count the reserves, if you count the Hiwaro petition, the reserves, then the 2 petitions in the 1930s, the Tūhoe settlement and now this settlement, that's 4 times. The Crown is not protecting the rangatiratanga of Upukerehi, and it has not done so. That is a significant issue here. Why are we here? Because the Crown has not protected the rangatiratanga of Upukerehi. The Crown is supporting processes that undermine the rangatiratanga of Upukerehi. Next slide, thanks, Santana. What might have been, well, this is what Upukerehi put up in 2011. We met with Whakatohea Hapu, and we said we wanted to seek a mandate where Upukerehi mandate Upukerehi, and they're there to progress the claims for their rohi, and the Whakatohea Hapu do the same. And we develop protocols how we work together and address areas where there might be more than one hapu claim to a certain area, and that was supported by a number of Whakatohea claimants, but not by the Crown. Next slide, thanks. So what we were talking about was Area A, that is seen as Upukerehi Tūturu, Area B, Whakatohea Tūturu, Area C, that's shared with Upukerehi, Whakatohea, Tūhoe, Ngāti Ruapani, Aitanga, Mahake, and no doubt others. So we aren't actually saying we claim all of A and C, we're saying we're A. We work with the others to jointly claim C. I want to put that on the record because I don't think that's clear. Next slide, thanks. Now another example of kaitiakitanga was with the Taku Taimawana Act. Our team, you see them sitting there, filed evidence on behalf of Te Upukerehi. The evidence that was given was the very first time Upukerehi have put their significant knowledge into print. They didn't put it all there, but there were over 100 wahi tapu that were identified. The evidence says where they came from, the names, the use, what's taken from them, all around the rohi. And what's important, customary marine title was awarded to those groups who put up that type of evidence, to those groups who live there and put up the evidence. The 5 hapu from Whakatohea and Te Upukerehi. There was a claim that was there for the whole of Whakatohea iwi, but that was unsuccessful. They were not able to put up the evidence that the hapu of Whakatohea and Te Upukerehi put up. Next claim. Now here are examples that Trevor's going to talk to of Upukerehi rangatiratanga. Kia ora, Trev.
Kuterere Marae, and I'm also the Resource Management member of Te Upukerehi Iwi. In 2014, our whales stranded in the Ohiwa Harbour, 70 whales, and that we did a recovery, customary recovery at Raimata Marae under the tohunga Tōhora Ramari Stewart of Ngāti Awa. We had researchers also from Otago University. That went on for 2 years. We closed off Roimata Marae and we made a laboratory Roimata Marae for those 2 years. And as you can see on the chart, on this picture here, Under the recovery, we extracted the oil, we extracted the googlers from the korokoro, and we extracted the ear bones of those whales, 70. We have the whole full collection sitting up Roimata Marae. It's internationally and nationally the largest collection of tōhora pilot whales, and it's sitting here in the Upokorehe. Just talk about our Kiwi project. It's supported by Papa Atawhai. We have a 260 hectare Kiwi reserve in the Whakatohea Valley. We monitor those Kiwis every year, 6 monthly to the year. We supported by the whānau of Rongopopoia in that Kiwi project under the whānau of the Whakatohea, Richard Whakatohea, who is now passed. And Richard's been, as you can see on this chart, holding the Kiwi, and Cleary, Owens and that, they are the whānau of Rongopopoia. They are the whānau that look after that Kiwi project up there. It's handed down to their daughter, because Richard has passed on now, Aroha Whakatohea. Something like 80 Kiwis in there. Their mahi in this Kiwi project is bait stations. They got to check and recheck these bait stations or rebait them. There's about 160 bait stations in that reserve, and this Kiwi project can be extended further in that Whakatohea reserve. The next one is NZTA project agreement, formerly a memorandum of understanding. We work with New Zealand Transport Associations. We have agreement with the New Zealand Transport agencies, and that's on the state highway from Ohope to Wainui and Matakrepu to Opotiki. We're currently working with NZTA on an alternative route in case State Highway 2 gets closed off to Opotiki. We do the alternative route coming through the back of Whakatohea. Te Upokorehe Statement of Cultural and Intellectual Property Rights. We represent it in our own rights, not as a hapu of Whakatohea, and we sit on Maina Kuria Tihiro. That's the Fisheries Forum, and Jonathan is sitting right there by Maui, and that of that forum. Upokorehe is on that forum. We sit on the Ohiwa Harbour Implementation Forum, the OHIF, the Ohiwa Harbour Strategy Coordination Group, and also we registered by the Statistics New Zealand in the 2017 census list of iwi classifications. What you don't know is also we manage the mangroves around Ohiwa Harbour. That project, we have a memorandum of understanding with the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. That's a huge project. That's a 10-year project. Every 3 to 4 months in the summertime, our whānau are down there as volunteers and also volunteers of the community to come down and help us remove these mangroves. What we do is take the mangroves out from the channel and work our way in so they don't spread and that. So that's a big mahi, all volunteer stuff. We have about 20 kaitiaki that look after the monitoring of the pipis. That's a huge project. They do a rotation system, and they're standing in here, and some of them are sitting in here about the pipis, the take of the pipi. The most important one is the permits and that, and how much people take from the pipi beds, whanoko piko piko, and under the coordination of Galen Kohunui that go around and they check and monitor. That's a huge project over the summertime. These are the things that the people don't know as kaitiaki within the Ohiwa Harbour, within the rohe of Te Upokorehe. Down here in front of me is my kaumātua. We go on site visits. We do about 6 site visits a month. No one else. We go along there. They are experts in the mātauranga. They're the experts in the knowledge holders of the rohe. It's about subdivisions. It's about building kaina within the rohe o te upoko rehe. But to do that, they've got to go through the resource consent process. And who's there? Us as upoko rehe. Tangata whenua there in that area. And that. The last one I want to talk about is our mahi that our kaitiaki do. I acknowledge all our kaumātua. I acknowledge all our rangatahi. I acknowledge all our kura. And that, as we can look down here, whānau, if we can't see them, this picture here says 1,000 words just in one picture. The bottom one is the sustainable sea star, the sea stars that came into the moana, and that they started to eat all the mussels, and that, so we had to come up with a project, we had to come up with researchers, and that to help us, and that to work on this predator called the sea star. They were the ones that were eating the mussels in the harbour and that. So I'd just like to acknowledge all our kaitiaki and upoko rehe, especially this fellow and his family, Richard Whakatohea from Rongopopoia, and that. Much respect to all of them, and I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you. Kia ora koutou.
Trevor's already mentioned the whales. Those whales were seen by Upukarehi as a tohu. Upukarehi had opposed the Tūhoe settlement all through. In 2014 it went through anyway. Upukarehi had gone to the Waitangi Tribunal, went to the Select Committee. The fight was very clear on the ground, but that piece of paper was going through. And when it happened, the whales beached, and our people saw that as a tohu. Next slide. That's what they took from that tohu. Next slide. So our view for the way forward hasn't changed since what we were saying in 2010, 2011. We want the tribunal to make findings and recommendations on all our issues, and we still believe the process we put up to mandate is a better one. We believe it is going to promote processes to working together of people committed to it. It recognises mana whenua, mana moana, rangatiratanga of the groups that live and work in the rohe, of the groups that have the whakapapa to the whenua. It recognises that because that is the only way forward for us. We want to continue and grow the strides we have made in our rohe because this is the key to the future of our cultural, social, economic and environmental well-being and development. And of course to continue to stand strong in our identity as upukarehi. And that's what our kaumātua's take is of the treaty settlements process. It's forcing some of our whānau to feel they have to be either Whakatohea or Tūhoe to have the say in the upukarehi rohe. Oh, we don't have to be other than who we are. And that is really significant. We do not have to be other than who we are. We do not have to whakapapa to other iwi to have a say in our rohe. And that's why upukarehi so strongly rejects this mandate. Each of our hapu and marae within the rohe have their own mauri, and it is our upukarehitanga that binds us together. Kia ora koroa.
Tēnā tātou. Hopefully you can hear me okay. We're having, for those who are watching on live stream, we may be having some difficulties with the screen, but we can certainly hear the presentation. So we're just working through some of those technical difficulties. Can I ask Jacob Pollock from Te Arawhiti, from the Crown, to come up and make a short presentation, please?
Acting Negotiations and Settlement Manager for the Whakatohea negotiations as well as other negotiations that are currently going on. in the Eastern Bay of Plenty. And my role here is to talk about the Crown's perspective on the consequences of the proposed amendment on the Whakatohea Treaty Settlement. Just waiting for my slides to appear. What I will be talking about will cover 5 areas, which I'm going to try and remember off the top of my head. The first point is on the claimant definition. The second point is on the effect on the claimant definition and effect on historical claims, the effect on the redress that was agreed in the deed of settlement that was initialed in December last year, the effect on Whakatohea post-settlement governance, the settlement of Te Upukurihi historical claims, and the Takutaimoana judgment in the High Court, which I'll just touch on briefly at the end. Clicker's not going. Now it's going. Okay, so the first, to start with, I'll just talk briefly about what is a claimant definition. A historical treaty settlement settles the claims of groups of Māori. We call them large natural groups. In the case of Whakatohea, obviously that's an iwi, who were prejudiced by Crown Acts or omissions that took place before 1992. They provide redress for those breaches of the treaty through an agreed deed of settlement and settlement legislation. A really important part of a treaty settlement, of the deed of settlement, the post-settlement governance entity trust deed and the associated legislation, is the claimant definition. Now what the claimant definition does is describe who it is that is being settled, whose claims are being settled and who will be beneficiaries of the treaty settlement. And it defines the settling group by reference to whakapapa, to ki tupuna, the exercise of customary interests, and area of interest. So I'm just going to talk about the whakapapa part of it today. Essentially, everyone who fits within this claimant definition gets described by this claimant definition is entitled to benefit from the settlement by registering with the PSGE. And they also have their historical claims, that's the pre-1992 claims, settled. And what that means essentially is that the courts and the Waitangi Tribunal will not be able to inquire into those claims after the settlement legislation passes. But in the case of the Whakatohea settlement, the Crown has agreed that the Northeastern Bay of Plenty District Inquiry can continue after the settlement, and it will be able to make findings but not recommendations on historical claims. It will still have its full jurisdiction over contemporary claims. So the Whakatohea claimant definition is defined by whakapapa to muriwai and or tuta muri, or recognised ancestors of recognised ancestors of 6 hapu. That's Ngāti Rua, Ngāi Tama, Ngāti Patu, Ngāti Ngahere, Ngāti Ira, and Te Upukurihi. This claimant definition was developed during the mandating process. It was a 7-year process that led to the Crown recognising the mandate of WPCT. So what this diagram shows is essentially the beneficiaries of the settlement are people who whakapapa to muriwai and or tuta muri, or a recognised ancestor of one of these hapu. So the first sort of consequence that we see of this proposed amendment is that muriwai may not be able to be one of the key tupuna for the purposes of the claimant definition. And the reason for that is demonstrated in this slide. It's because the union between Ani Iwaho and Tuamutu goes to Raunoa, and that brings in the muriwai whakapapa line. And I also note that Repanga where it goes through that descent line, and that's obviously a key ancestor for Ngāti Rua. I've included Tairongo in there as well because he's one of those recognised ancestors of Te Upukurihi who get included as key ancestors for the purposes of this claimant definition. So the point here is that because of this whakapapa line, we would have to potentially change the claimant definition. And I just note that this whakapapa has been drawn from a variety of sources, including Whakatohea Māori Trust Board information, Upokurihi, Y claims and statements in the Waitangi Tribunal, as well as others. So a consequence of amending the Y claim so that Upokurihi are no longer included is that the historical claims would no longer be included. So because the inclusion in the claimant definition means that your historical claims are included, if you are taken out, then those historical claims will not be included. That said, all of the Te Upokurihi Y claims include statements that Upokurihi is a hapu of Te Whakatohea, and so we would still include them to the extent that they are Whakatohea claims under an amended claimant definition. I'd just also note, because I meant to mention it before, the historical treaty settlement settles all claims, not just Y claims, because from the Crown's perspective, all of Whakatohea and all of the people within that claimant definition have claims against the Crown, whether or not they're registered as Y claims. This is just an example of some of those statements in the Y claims about the Upokurihi and its relationship with Whakatohea. So the next question is, what would be the effect on the agreed redress? A standard part of the treaty settlement process, a really important part, is the addressing overlapping interests, and that's because different groups have interests in the same areas. If Te Upokurihi were excluded from the Whakatohea treaty settlement, we would have to reconsider the package. Ministers may decide to reduce the financial value of the package because it would be settling a smaller group. That would be a decision for them. What would definitely need to happen is discussions between Te Upokurihi and Te Whakatohea about redress in the overlapped area. And the deed of settlement could not be ratified until those discussions take place and necessary changes are made. So you'll see on this map here, there's the Upokurihi area of interest overlaid with the Whakatohea area of interest. There are about 14 cultural redress properties proposed to transfer through the settlement, and that in that overlapped area, that includes Te Papa, Hospital Hill, the Waiotahi Scenic Reserve, Tawai, Matikirapu, Kotare, Pairata, Matiti, Tawhitinui, and the Urapa Tawhito, and amongst others. There's also commercial and cultural commercial sites, a few schools, other commercial properties, and rights of first refusal. There's another aspect of it is the natural resources arrangements, which are over the Nukuho, Waiaweka and Waiotahi rivers, and approximately 48,000 hectares of a co-authored chapter in the Bay of Plenty Conservation Management Strategy. And what that chapter does, what that redress does is it will allow Whakatohea to essentially co-write the rules that govern conservation land in the rohe. And finally, there's approximately 3,900 hectares of the marine space that's proposed to be reserved through the settlement for aquaculture development. Would have to be subject to overlapping interest discussions. Now, really important to note that just because it's in an overlapped area doesn't mean we would remove it. It's all about deciding what's appropriate to include. So the next question is the effect on post-settlement governance. As Kahukori mentioned, there's a proposed post-settlement governance entity which has 16 seats on them. 2 of those seats are for Te Upokurihi. And obviously, if Upokurihi was not part of the settlement, then those Upokurihi seats would be removed. That said, people who are members of Te Upokurihi who whakapapa to Whakatohea through other lines or fit into the claimant definition otherwise would still be beneficiaries of the Whakatohea settlement and represented through other hapu. The next question is the future of the Whakatohea Māori Trust Board. the current proposal is to use the Whakatohea Treaty Settlement to dissolve the Whakatohea Māori Trust Board and transfer its assets and liabilities to the post-settlement governance entity. The reason we can do that through the treaty settlement is because currently the claimant definitions of both are the same. And that means that through the ratification process, Whakatohea can make a decision that the Whakatohea Māori Trust Board goes and everything goes on to the new entity. That wouldn't be the case if Upokurihi were removed from the mandate and removed from the treaty settlement, because there wouldn't be that same claimant definition, that same beneficiary group. So, the next up is the settlement of Te Upokurihi historical claims. If in the future Te Upokurihi wish to enter the negotiation of the settlement of their claims, the Minister of Treaty of Waitangi negotiations would need to make a decision that that's an appropriate thing to do. Following that, there would need to be a mandating process to represent Upokurihi in negotiations. And then, in accordance with our standard processes, ministers would need to decide to recognise the mandate and then enter negotiations. And then those negotiations would lead to the development of a redress package based on the aspirations of Te Upokurihi and what's available within Crown policy. And decisions on what the Crown offer would contain would be made by the government of the day. And it wouldn't necessarily include things that were removed from the Whakatohea package through an overlapping interest process. It would be decisions taken at the time, which presumably would be after the Waitangi Tribunal report. And just to note that, just like the Whakatohea package, an Upokurihi package would be subject to addressing overlapping interests, not just with Te Whakatohea, but also with Tūhoi, Ngāti Awa, Te Aitanga, Mahaki, and Te Whānau Kai, who are, all have interests in the Upokurihi area. And finally, there wouldn't, from our perspective, we don't think there would be any effect on the High Court judgment on the Takutai Moana application. We think that that's an ongoing thing. The decision's been made, and this would have no effect on that. But that's not to be taken as legal advice, and people who are claimants in that process should seek their own advice on that question. And just another note to add, that the settlement of historical claims would not affect rights under the Marine and Coastal Area Act either, in any case. Yeah, so that's it from the Crown's perspective, so thank you for your time.
Jacob, tēnā koe, utira ki a koutou te kanohi a tāu. There will be an opportunity to ask Jacob questions, but I'm going to ask the Whakatohea Pre-Settlement Claims Trust to come forward. Just while they are organising themselves, I note that we're just past midday, and it's very important that those who are listening and at the hui have a chance to ask their questions. So those who are responsible for the catering and so forth, could a message be passed through, please, that we are likely to need our 2 hours to go through to 1 o'clock, and to make arrangements accordingly to make sure that we have enough time for our questions. I can see that that's going to be necessary. Maui Ma, the floor is yours to give your presentation.
Kia ora koutou ringa ngā aho tanga o te wā, nō reira, mihi ana ki a koe te kai tuki ngā karakia, e wāwahi ngā kōrero mō tātou i tēnei ata, o tira ki a koe anō Wallace, whakatau nei i te iwi, i runga i tēnei o ngā kaupapa, korua ko te kahutu, nō reira tēnā kōrua. O tira, mihi tonu ana ki ngā māngai o ngā hapu, ngā kaumātua tautoko nei i tēnei mahi whakatau i te raupatu, koutou i tai tōmuri mai, mai tauranga, tēnā koe, o reira, tēnā koutou. O tira koutou katoa, te whānau, whānui, tēnā koutou. Look, there's just got a bunch of slides to talk to, and really to talk to some of the things that we're thinking about in relation to the petition. But there was a couple of things that I just wanted to highlight first. One was we're whānau. And in coming in, mihi nei tātou ki tātou. Maud, Amber, I all sit on the Whakatohea Māori Trust Board together at different times, all advancing kaupapa about Whakatohea, all advancing kaupapa e tautoko nei I ngā mahi tūpokorehe. All this great kaitiaki mahi that's been going on, that Trevor talks about, mahi tonu ki aia, me ona rōpū, koutou katoa, e kōkiri nei era mahi, because that's just the right thing to do. And one of the things that's been suggested by Kahukura in their presentation is that changes. Is that something about the settlement being completed will mean that none of that can continue. And that's just wrong. That's just not true. And all of the good mahi that happened there, that's been done over the last decades, has happened while that whenua was with the Crown, while the Whakatohea Māori Trust Board was in place. All of those things can still happen, and they've happened with the tautoko. So when the tōhora came and they needed support, the Trust Board was there, providing puti as well, not running out in front saying, hey, this is us, this is a iwi kaupapa, but allowing the hapu to do their things in their rohe, but with the support is required. So I just want to shift that part of the kōrero to the side a bit, because that part of the kōrero, that mahi is that mahi. But we need to be thinking about actually what's been said in the petition and what it means for us. Because the other part of the kōrero, which Kahukore gave, was that there's something that this is just about the claims. And this is just about that. But the effect of it is much bigger. And that's what we need to be thinking about. If it was as easy as just take a claim out and nothing else changes, kei te pai. But there's a whole lot of statements that have been made, and I haven't got my clicker, which is why I'm still talking. Is these things happen. So these are just reiterating kind of the points, and Kahukore put them up as well. But really, the points here which were supported, and while this has been presented as a tūpokorehe petition, anyone from Whakatohea could sign it. So this isn't just a tūpokorehe voice. This is a voice of a number of people, the ones that did that. And it's also not a position that tūpokorehe whānui hold. It's certainly a position that, some people support. And that's just like we are in the settlement itself. Some of Ngai Tama support the settlement, some of them don't. Some of Ngāti Ira support the settlement, some of them don't. Okay? We're all in that same situation, but through the process, we've been able to do things like have votes that give us a sense of where those things are at. And where the settlement's at the moment, and if this thing will go backwards, because I'd much rather be talking about this stuff here, because that was us initialing the deed of settlement, which said that the settlement is now ready to go out for all the whānau to have their talk about it. Up till now it's been the pre-settlement trust, the Crown, the claimant, the tribunal, all of those groups having their say around what's right for us. But now we're at the point where actually we can have the say. Only if we can get there, and we're still trying to get there. And this is the thing we've got to get past to do it. So, back one. And so the claims that are made here, they haven't actually really been talked to by the petitioners. They've been talked to by the Crown about the effect, but this kaupapa here isn't related to these. Upokorehe aren't and have never been Whakatohea. The whakapapa and claims haven't seen anything that shows where that separation is. The Crown is putting up things. We can show what the whakapapa is for Whakatohea and how it links tūpokorehe into it. And it was our tūpuna that decided at their point in time, anei ngā whakapape here nei a tātou. And that is something that sits with Muriwai because she's the thing that links all of us. And as soon as we try and cut one bit off, actually we're cutting one of her arms off as well. And that's why this ends up being a sort of a hard thing to work through. Upukorehe haven't been represented on the Pre-Settlement Claims Trust. Anei, te taumanga kaumata. Bruce, he's been there since the beginning. Keita, she was there since the beginning. Muriwai, she was there since the beginning. Josie, she sat alongside all of the kōrero. Every time we had to have a kōrero with Ngāti Awa, every time we had to have a kōrero with Tūhoi, because you saw on Jake's map, whenever we wanted to get some whenua within that space, they had a say. And it wasn't just Josie there saying, e kao, waiho mātu upukorehe, it was the rest of us. Ngāti Rua was there, Ngāti Patu was there, tautoko I ngā kōrero a ngā kaumātua tūpukorehe. Waiho mā mātou, waiho mātu Whakatohea. And then where the whenua goes. So what we've seen, if you've been watching some of the other ones, is actually that the slides have changed. The slides have been changing. As the story has to change to speak back to actually what gets presented. So we didn't see the picture of the whenua tūturu or tūpukorehe that's been claimed from the Waiwika River all across. It was the Crown that had to put up and show, actually, this is a part of the claim. This is a part of the effect of just having this talk about claims, because it actually means a lot more than that. So, next slide, thank you. There's a whole lot of things here. If you got the book, if you've had the thing sent to you, you'll see these. You'll see these in there, and these are all just the facts that speak back to the claims. And the first one there about upukorehe aren't and never been Whakatohea, it goes back further than the Ōpape Native Reserve. And it wasn't just tūpukorehe that wasn't related to the Ōpape Native Reserve. Ngāti Patu, that wasn't their whenua either. That was the effect of the Raupatu. Crown pushed us all off. We all got relocated on Ngāti Rua whenua. Ngaitama wasn't there, but we are now. And that was, that process. So upukorehe, just like the rest, we were all put there with Whakatohea. But you go back before that, in the Treaty of Waitangi, before all of this happens, the signatories on that for Whakatohea, 3 of the 7 are upukorehe. They didn't sign as upukorehe, they signed as Whakatohea. But Ranginui, when he did his book, said, anei, this is where these ones were from. So, there's kōrero all there, because we know they've been a part of the trust board. And it was the rangatira at that time, and that was the first settlement. The first settlement that we got is the iwi, where our rangatira sat there and said, anei ngā hapu that are a part of the settlement. And upukore has been there since then. And there's the whānau that are on the register. And so they're there for a reason, and one of those reasons is that the whakapapa connects us. So trying to say that the whakapapa is separate, well, we can't tell because they haven't shown anything. But over here, upukorehe, Ngāti Rua, both come off repanga. So how do you separate that? How do you separate that out? And while there's been statements being made into places, whether it's the tribunal, and the question has been asked of the Waitangi Tribunal, you saw right at the beginning, there's been two urgency inquiries. First one came back, said it's reasonable for upukorehe to be included in the settlement. The actual wording is it's not unreasonable, but that means the same thing, double negative. So, you know, they've looked at this question and said, yeah, they're part of Whakatohea. The settlement for Whakatohea continuing should carry on this way. And Jake's already talked about the claims and how the rangatira that we're putting them in, we're saying that. And this is 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So something's happened in the last little while that has meant people want to revisit that history and reconstruct the story around how those things came about. Here's the people I talked about. They've been involved. And at its base, this is really about that thing. It's about a mana kōrero and who has the right to have a say and represent their people. And when you go into negotiations, add that kōrero about the mandating, there's always been a tension. There's always a tension between that shift from the claimant space, because people put their own name up. They say, you know, I'm doing it on behalf of these people. But then when you get to the negotiations and the mandate, the people have to choose who they want to be their māngai. And when the people choose someone that's not the claimant, you end up with this friction. And that's what we've had in, you know, a lot of this process. So, anei ngā māngai mō tūpoko rehe that have been a part of the process. But it's not the māngai that the petitioners would like. They would like that to be someone else. And so that's just, you know, it's one of those things. Just one of those things that comes about. And then we get the kind of the whenua bit. So when we think about the implications of it, we're actually thinking about all of these things. Whakapapa, it is, strictly speaking, it won't change our whakapapa. It can't change our whakapapa because our whakapapa is what it is. But it's our identity as Whakatohea, and that's described by our whakapapa. So it describes the way we can talk about ourselves. And it will describe the way in which we can talk about where is our whenua, what is the rohe o te Whakatohea. And those are kōrero that are tikanga kōrero, and not really the things that should be playing out as a part of these sort of processes. And like Kahukuri said, you know, she thinks it should be the kōrero tuku iho. But that's not the place either. That's a tribunal process. Once again, going to the Pākeas to say, tell us who we are. That's not a, let's go to the marae, we'll have that kōrero. And we were at Waiawa last Sunday, having that kōrero, and Danny Pararu, when he stood up and did his mihi, could point to the po in that whare that said, anei, te tūpono tūpukurehe. And then could point down the hill at the whare karakia and go, the whare karakia sits on part of the upukurehe land within the Ōpape Native Reserve. And these things are all a part of that relationship. So one of the reasons they were put there was because next to the Ngāti Patu site was because they were next to Ngāti Patu, along the place that's now being claimed as only tūpukurehes. And so you see here the whakapapa that was put together, and this sits in the trust board, and you've got Teriaki, Amo, Matinga Biddle, the places. There was a whole other process Keita Hudson talked about the kaumātua that were all involved in the kōrero that just wanted to represent this. So we can represent all the 6 hapu in the trust board. You've got the carvings that represent all of the 6 hapu and their tūpuna. And you've got those first inaugural members of the trust board from each of the hapu that's sitting there as a sort of a reminder to us. So, and this is the bit. If you take that bit off, how do we describe the rest without that bit being there, based on the whakapapa? So that's the angst that a number of people have, and while, you know, they're saying this isn't what this kōrero is about, this is what it will be about into the future. Because in the past we talk about ourselves as ngā uri o Muriwai, and that's Whakatohea. But into the future you wouldn't be able to do that, and that's what makes it kind of weird. And that was the kōrero from the Crown. And it was actually the Crown that brought it up to us. You know, we weren't thinking about it in that way, but because you need to describe the beneficiaries, you do start to talk about it in a different way. And so, next slide. I think there's a lot of people that feel like te kautu, about actually we don't think it's right to rewrite our whakapapa, and especially not through a process that's not one that's a tikanga one where you're starting to talk about it yourselves and come to your own decision. And there's things that would have to happen before you got there, and that's not a vote. So the next bit then talks about the whenua. And so we've been using this, and you'll see it in the map for Te Rohe o Te Whakatohea. This was the traditional lands as described by Hoiroa Horokai and Hiremia Hoira. And Hoiroa Horokai was tūpukorehe. You can find his name in the lands as tūpukorehe given to one of the Hiwero blocks. But this is what they were saying in 1920, is this was our traditional lands. From Te Rangi, over the other side of Ōpape, to Marae Tōtara, over on the Hiwa Harbour. And this is, however, it's always been represented like that, by the Pre-Settlement Claims Trust, by all of the hapu of Whakatohea, including the kaumātua from Upukorehe. That's the area that we would say we have our interest in, and this is the area where we've negotiated things. So I think that's another important point. There's nothing that the petitioners have said that's bad about the settlement. Like in terms of the stuff that's coming back to us. So the things we're getting back are good. It's starting this argument about actually, this is my bit. We think we should be having this bit. And that's a kōrero for all of us to have sometime in the future, not through this kind of thing. And this was the one, well, this isn't actually the one. They got another map. And that map's been removed from a couple of, from the earlier presentations. And I think that's been done because they've been catching a bit of heat around it, which had this sort of rohe here as the whenua tūturu of Upukorehe, and then the shared bit being down here. But this is the Waiweka River. This is the river mouth. So if you're back home at the New World, head out over the bridge. As soon as you cross that bridge and looking at the golf course, they're claiming that's the whenua tūturu Upukorehe. Now my dad's on Grants Road, looks across the hospital hill. I know Ngaitama were there. I know when I go out along Pairata, that was where Ngāti Patu were. You know, so we got pushed off that whenua because of the raupatu, and now there's this claim that's being made on it, which means that all the redress that's coming back to us collectively is now going to be subject, or would be subject, to a negotiation with this group. So that's, that's something that's tricky, and you can kind of see here. And, right from, I better get this right, Te Kaito was giving me some lessons on the way up in the car. Right from Onekawa to Mawhai, which was Repanga's pa. So, what's that? He's a descendant of both Ngāti Roa and things. You got Mokomoko's pa. You got all of these things that were in this area where we know we had to move over time, back and forwards, different ways. And that's one of the reasons why he māma te whakatakoto i te rohe o te iwi. But once you start trying to cut it up into the hapu, things start to fall apart. And even in the Maka claims, they've been presented about the Maka claim, and they said that the Whakatohea iwi one failed. That's not true. Because the Whakatohea Māori Trust Board put one up, and that was for the hapu that didn't have one. And then you had the other hapu. There was another one that was taken, which didn't get recognised, but the outcome of that process was all of the hapu together share the title. All 6 of them, Upokorehe and the rest. And that means the title in Ohiwa Harbour, the judge, after looking at the evidence, says, actually, all of the hapu are here. Aha ko ngā mahi ana koe, Trevor. You know. But all the way along the coast as well. So it's not like we're just only here, we're all out here as well, right down to Ōpape. Kei kora tūpokorehe. In terms of that title, because it was easy to do it as the iwi. Marama e take atu to that place. So that was the outcome from that process. Now they're still kind of having a bit of an argument about how that will be represented, but we're all there, all 6 of us. And so, you know, we end up in the situations of wanting to think about how we're going to organise ourselves, and how we organise ourselves through post-settlement entities is where we start having a bit of a kind of a ajibaji, when we're just going home, going to a tangi and going to have a hui and whatever else, you know, all whānau, and that's all cool. As soon as we start thinking about who's going to be responsible for managing the money, the putia, things start getting a bit tricky. I think the important thing around this, though, is that what Bruce and Keita and Muriwai always told us at the pre-settlement trust table was this was a kōrero for Upokorehe to sort out themselves. And heard in the waiata, the waiata tautoko at the beginning, are talking about Upokorehe iwi, and they named Roimata Marae, but they didn't talk about the other ones. Kuterere, Maramohoi, those other ones that are sitting there, that are around there, that are a part of the iwi, but actually aren't getting a voice in the process. And they're feeling like they're not getting a voice in the process because they haven't been supported. There's people that will support, just like, you know, the for and against, but they've been here and they're not interested in this kōrero about them being the iwi, because they are putting forward their view around their relationship as a part of Whakatohea. And that represents what their kau have talked about as well. So what does this all mean? We know what we're getting from the settlement. There's nothing that's hidden, there's nothing that's unknown about it. The deed has been initialed. So everything up here is what comes back to Whakatohea. How we manage it is for us to work out. We'll put our representatives up from each of our hapu, and then they'll have that kōrero about the right place for things to go, including where the whenua will end up, those 39 sites. There'll be some of those, I think, that definitely they'll go, yeah, waiho mātu pukorehe. There'll be some that will go, hey, kei a Ngāti Ira, kei Ngāti Patu. Those things will shake down from that kōrero. So, you know, it isn't just the removal of claims. And they talked about all of the claims being, there's no claim that's distinctly upokorehe. All of them have got some talking about Whakatohea, so they're all going to be partially settled by a Whakatohea one, and then have this other bit. So, you know, that's a bit kind of weird around how that would work out. And what it does do as well, and we talked about this, because not only do we have Te Tāwharo to Whakatohea, which was set up for all the 6 hapu, because we all said representation from the hapu was important. That's what makes us strong as a iwi. Would end up in the situation where they're not included. And that leads us to this, which is we have the trust board, with all of us and tūpukorehe there, and they'll all be talking about muriwai and things in there, and then we'll have this thing here, which would be another Whakatohea entity. So we'd have these two sort of Whakatohea entities, both having a, trying to think about where those things sit. So when we went around and talked to all the whānau through the settlement process, they all agreed that the time for the trust board is ending. Kutia rātou mahi, it's time for the new thing. That's got the other kind of crown levers and bits and pieces in it, which we want to get rid of. Let's remove that, and we'll put everything into the new entity. So we can only do that if we're all there. We can't do that if they're not, and so we'd end up with this. And then if this was the case too, then you'd also have a new pukorehe entity too. So you'd then have three entities kind of having a talk about things. So the difficult thing about this process is, and how it's been set up, is the petitioners have had a chance to talk about things from upukarehe point of view. We get a chance from the pre-settlement trust, but actually most of the other whānau from upukarehe that want to be able to put up a different point of view don't have a space to do that through this thing. And so their voice about being privileged to have their whakapapa shared through Whakatohea whānau, always been taught by my kuia, Winnie Biddle, and Kraua, Hone Te Whare Kolia, that we are proud upukarehe hapua te Whakatohea iwi. All of those voices, we don't get, the rest of the whānau don't get to hear beyond them. So we've been trying to at least have that come up, because the process, what should have happened is them having their own corridor and then making a decision together. And if they were all wanting to do that, then you come and have the corridor. But this is kind of jumping ahead of the course. So the pre-settlement claims trust, really want to sort of maintain kotahitanga, maintain the iwi. We have this shared whakapapa, we have this shared relationship with the whenua, and how our ancestors have understood us and how we are now is what we should be like in the future. And that's Whakatohea. And I think there's an important thing for people to think through too, is what sort of leadership are you supporting? We want to exhibit rangatiratanga, and people are putting forward, this is about rangatiratanga. Well, that's about rāranga te tira. How do you bring groups together and weave them together for the betterment of all? Not about how you take them apart and separate them. So that's why the trust, their position is say no to the resolution, maintain our whakapapa, maintain our whenua, and maintain Whakatohea. So, kia ora koutou.
Maui, tēnā koe. We're at 25 to 1. We're going to move into question and answer now. And I ask if Maui, you could find a seat somewhere near a microphone, and for those from Te Upokorehe who are going to answer questions, be near the microphone too, so that we can have an efficient process of answering pātai. So just to repeat, whānau, if you're going to ask a question, if you could raise your hand, the microphone will come over to you. And once you have the microphone in your hand, can you then start your kōrero, please? And for those who are answering, please keep your answers succinct so we have time for the whānau to ask their pātai. Kia ora, we have a pātai down here in the front with... Yeah. Could someone hand her a microphone, please? If you could stand up e te tuahine. Kia Kia ora.
Can you hear me?
Thank
Kia
you.
ora.
If you can state your name, please.
Ko Lamora Ahitapu Rogers aho, ko Dixie Biddle Pukipuku Tōku Krani. My grandmother and my cousin Paula's grandmother is the sister of Boy Biddle from Kutarere, who was a trustee on Whakatohea Māori Trust Board for many years, representing Upokerehe Hapu, Kutarere. I'm speaking because my auntie Gloria, who is the sister of my grandmother, daughter of Winnie Collier, she couldn't be here because she's had to go south because of family illness. But we've been talking a lot within our little group of Biddle Collier whānau, and this is a question that we really would like to ask about what's happening here with this movement. So TACT want to exclude the upokerehe claims from the mandate. There are 3 upokerehe marae. This process has been driven out of Roimata. It does not have the tautoko of Kutarere or Maramahui marae. So how can TACT speak for all of upokerehe? Why do those of us upokerehe who do not agree with withdrawal not have a place at the table so that the people that are voting can make an informed choice, they can hear both sides of the story? In this kōrero that's been going along, and there's been a lot of kōrero behind the scenes, we're also being told that Roimata are the only upokerehe tūtoru. So those of us that say no, we want our claim to stay with Whakatohea. And why would we want to join this new iwi where we are second-class citizens? We're not considered to be tūtoru upokerehe. So the second part of the question is, if this goes through, if our claims are withdrawn, then where do we go to or belong if you withdraw us? What happens to us and our mokopuna? Kia ora.
Kia ora. I'd like to respond to that question. Firstly, I'd like to Maud Edwards, Te Upokerehe, and I'd like to, sorry, what was your name? Lamona. There are 5 marae and hapu within the rohe of Te Upokerehe. So that's the first thing that needs to be made very clear. There are other voices, Rongopapoia and Tūranga Pikitoi, who also have a say and who reside within that rohe. We are here today to represent the voice of 700 plus petitioners. That's why we're here. You too have the opportunity to voice your say through the vote. This is a Crown process that the WPCT has engaged with, so I think you need to direct your question to the WPCT on how you can be involved or have a voice. We've followed the process in their deed. This is why we're here today. So when you talk about Kutarere and Maramahui not wanting to participate or wanting to represent them, we have 220 voices from Kutarere Marae that say otherwise, and we have 150 from Maramahui voices. So you're one person here today. You are here to voice your voice. We don't see evidence that you have the voice of other people behind you. We definitely do have the voice from the people from those marae. So, this is not being disrespectful. Let me finish, please. This is not being disrespectful to you and your kōrero, but there are other people, and we're talking big numbers here, who signed a petition which Maui was very clear on what they were signing. I pick up the point where you said I know they're not objecting, but what they are clearly saying is we want to be withdrawn. We want to keep our lands, our whenua. We want to protect our wāhi tapu. We want to have our own unique whakapapa recognised. Very clear. And that is why
Kia ora, Maud.
we are here today to represent that voice. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Can I have a, thank you for that. Can I have another question, please?
Kia ora whānau, my name is Miranda Horan. I am Upokorehe, hapu and Whakatohea iwi. I have a couple of questions here, one for the Crown. Just the process that we're undergoing at the moment to exclude Te Upokorehe hapu from the Te Whakatohea settlement, if that should happen, does that automatically bestow iwi status as far as the Crown is concerned on Upokorehe? Like how would that work?
No, I don't think that the Crown, I mean there are some areas where the Crown sort of recognises iwi status through the Fisheries Act, but generally speaking it's not for the Crown to bestow iwi status. The real question is would the Crown then say yes, it's appropriate to negotiate a treaty settlement with Te Upokorehe, and that would be a question, as I said, for ministers. I would say though that the consequences of the amendment, we don't know exactly what they'd be in terms of how Te Upokorehe would be recognised in the future, but it's something that could eventually develop. But yeah, I just don't think that we can make that call.
Thank you, Jacob. There was a second part.
So in the event that this goes ahead and Te Upokorehe are excluded, what that actually looks like for me as a member of Upokorehe moving forward with representation for settlement.
If ministers decided that it was appropriate to negotiate a treaty settlement, there would be a mandating process, much like there was a mandating process for the Whakatohea Pre-Settlement Claims Trust, and we would expect that was a mandating process that had broad support amongst Te Upokorehe and had the usual standards of transparency, accountability and representativeness on the entity that was proposing to represent Te Upokorehe in treaty settlement negotiations, and you would be able to participate in that process. So it wouldn't be the case that we would just turn around and say, okay, well the Te Upokorehe Treaty Claims Trust is now the mandated body that we would talk to through this process. This process will not confer a mandate on any group. It would just exclude Te Upokorehe from the Whakatohea Pre-Settlement Claims Trust mandate.
So just carrying on from that, so given that TUCT currently have a 5%, sorry, was it a 5% that voted, so there's 95% of other people that are still out there that haven't, I suppose, given that mandate to them. So moving forward in terms of clarifying Te Upokorehe as an iwi, I mean, for me, I spoke a lot to my koro and my whānau before I came here, and like I think we've had four generations that have been, so going back to Kiripa, back on the pai at Roimata and at Maramahui and at Kutarere, coming down to Moore Morgan, coming down to koro who, Kimoro Pokepoke, who lies at Roimata, down to Dad Koro. So my question is, all of my tipuna who have sat on all of these, the pai at these marae, have told me that I am Te Whakatohea. So I want to know from TUCT what exactly the claim is that disputes what my tipuna and what my Pākeke are telling me, that we are part of Whakatohea, please.
Kia ora. After that question has been answered, I'm just going to ask that we move to some other pātai too, so that we can move around the room. So, Tuck, do you want to answer that question?
The 5% was what was mentioned in the mandate. That was the threshold for the petition to reach. That was the 5%. Kia ora.
E pātai anō.
Aroha, excuse my back whānau. I only have two pātai, one for the Crown and one for Tucked. I'll try to keep these very brief. Just to you, Mr. Pollock, as a representative of Te Arawhiti, is it your understanding that the other two petitions, one of those petitions collected over 1,600 signatures, and the Naitama petition collected over 550 signatures, all of those also representative of other hapu whānau and wai claimants that want to withdraw? So I just want to clarify that so our whānau all understand that although this has been triggered by upukorehe, and I'm aroha to all of our whānau getting dragged through this process, however I do identify that it is a Crown process. Was the Crown aware of those petitions having collected those number of signatures, but not having met or not having been determined by the Claims Trust as being valid petitions to be recognised as part of this process, also having met the 5% threshold? All of this is set out, sorry, I'm just going to take a step here to dumb this down for some of us, because some of us just don't get it. So the 5% threshold, the 5% threshold that we refer to is what's in the deed of mandate held by the Claims Trust. In order for any of us to want to be able to withdraw, we have to meet that threshold, and that's what brought us here. We're not saying there's only 5% that support withdrawal. That was just the percentage needed to get us here today. So I'm just asking you as the Crown representative, are you aware of those petitions having been run, that number of signatures having been collected, and the fact that those petitions were rejected, flat out rejected, and we weren't given the opportunity to actually go through the same process as Te Upukorehe Treaty Claims Trust on behalf of Te Upukorehe? You were?
Of course.
So we have to focus on the upukorehe kaupapa, and keep your questions short, please, given our time. Thank you.
Just to Te Upukorehe Treaty Claims Trust. So there was some propaganda currently being circulated inferring Upukorehe are claiming everything to the west of the Waiweka River as part of the area of interest for Raupatu. Have Te Upukorehe, what relationships do they have, if any, with the surrounding hapu with respect to kaitiakitanga and shared areas of interest?
Am I on? Yep. We actually have very strong relationships with particularly the hapu that are on the eastern side of Te Upukorehe. That's Ngāti, and we also have great relationships with Ngāi Tamahaua, who come across and have a lot of areas of interest that they exercise their kaitiakitanga within what we would call the rohe of Te Upukorehe. But we work together, we kōrero together, no treating of each other's mana, and that's how I actually see us moving forward. We have not been given the opportunity to have that type of discussion with our neighbouring hapu. On the western side, we have great relationships with Ngāi Tai Whakaia. On the Marae Tōtara boundary, which through the Mecca hearing, we both acknowledged our mana whenua, mana moana at Marae Tōtara. So I can quite honestly say that through the Mecca, it's just been a great example of what can be achieved. Hapu retaining their tino rangatiratanga, because this process totally takes the voice of the hapu. You have individuals that are representing everybody's view, and in our case, Te Upukorehe's case, and I might even say other hapu at the RSA in Opotiki, Roger Rakuraku stood up for Ngāti Ira, and he advised that his hapu want to withdraw from this settlement, Ngāti Ira. I understand Ngāi Tamahua is of the same view, yes, so that for me is the way forward, the outcome of the meka. Maui speaks about it being a Whakatohea, awarding the marine title. I don't see it as that, and neither do the hapu that received that marine title. That is uplifting the tino rangatiratanga of each hapu. No other entity umbrellaing over them to tell them what to do, and that's exactly where we're heading to now, having that PSG set up. We're going to have no voice. So kia ora, we want to carry on having the tino rangatiratanga within our own rohe. So kia ora.
Kia ora, Maud. Before another pātai is asked, I just want to give you, Maui and others, an opportunity. I can't tell from the room, but if there is a comment you wish to make on some of those pātai, do so now, and then we'll go to the next pātai.
So they're just going to answer.
It's clear that there's a number of claimants associated with different claims that haven't been supportive of it, and those are the views that have been expressed by the claimants. There's been representation from all of the hapu through the process, just like we shared with the Pukorehe case, and really it becomes a question for the whānau at the end of the day to have their say. And at the moment, all of the processes that would look to obstruct that are about stopping actually Whakatohea deciding what they think is right for us.
Kia ora Leo, kia ora Maui. Where we left off at Waiawa. Kia ora te whānau. Kia ora Whakatuakana, koutou. Coming to the fore, this is not a question, but coming to the fore boldly is whakapapa. It's everywhere. Whakapapa. I've been told to be careful of whakapapa. My whakapapa to the Upukorehe. Been made aware when I grew up, was to be careful of the whakapapa, because my whakapapa in Upukorehe is incestuous. Kia mau ki te no whiore. He no whiore te kaupapa o nā whakapapa. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, that's in my whakapapa to the Upukorehe. Very incestuous. Kia ora tātou. Kia ora. I just wanted to make whakapapa aware within all of us here today. Kia ora tātou.
Tēnā koe. Anyone else who wishes to ask a pātai?
Kia ora. Kia ora rā, ko Rosie Tamahiroa Puki Puki Taku Ingoa, ko Bruce Puki Puki Taku Papa. I'm just here representing my father. He's actually just got out of hospital this morning. He's 80 years old and couldn't travel here. Just very quickly, I do have a pātai for Takt. My grandparents, who lie at Roimata alongside my auntie, held the mantle for Kotahitana through Te Uri o Upoko, through Whakatohea with the land settlements. It's weird when you get up here, isn't it? But so what happened was that my grandparents worked tirelessly to build Kotahitana amongst Whakatohea, and they were proud hapu of Upukorehe. My father's also taken on that mantle with his tireless work over the last 30 years, and now here I am. Here's my question. So if
You have, I feel that TACT has failed to give us the whakapapa for how you can make such a claim as being an iwi. Yeah, are you heckling me? You say that you can explain that later, but you want to make the fact that you're an iwi now. You know, here's my question. My whānau, who whakapapa, as Miranda says, we've worked tirelessly with upokorehe, because we are the hapu of Whakatohea, have worked tirelessly for that. And now, with all of this going on, what plans do you have for my papa? What plans do you have for our kaumātua? How are you going to care for our mokopuna? How are you going to care for our tamariki? You know, I'm a uri of Whakatohea, and this separation goes against everything that my tupuna have been working for tirelessly for many, many centuries, past colonisation with the atrocities that happened to us. We can't ignore that. So that's my question is you've failed to give us your whakapapa. When are we going to get that if you are taking iwi status? And what do you plan to do to support us as a whānau moving forward? Kia ora rā.
Kia ora. Just before the answer comes, sorry to do this to you, whānau. Just part of my job is making sure we can keep to an efficient time frame, so we're close to 1 o'clock. There are 6 more pātai after Moanas. Can I ask that the question please be really brief? You don't have to repeat it during your question, and that the answer is really succinct as well, because there must be time for a little bit of a wrap-up, karakia and then kai. So handing over to you, Tucked, for a short and succinct answer, please.
Kia ora. Now, a quick and succinct answer for that would be, we are here today to protect the taonga for our mokopuna. If we didn't care about our mokopuna, we wouldn't be here today. For yourself and the education that you're seeking around what's going to happen to you, what's happening, where will your papa be, I think what's happened here is it's the cart before the horse thing. If we'd have had that discussion right at the beginning, instead of letting a couple of individuals run off and define who upokorehe is, we might not be in this room today. So my kōrero to you is that that discussion needs to happen, because upokorehe has its own unique history. The marae within our iwi has its own unique history. Each marae has their own hapu and mauri. So this is not about disrespecting any of those marae. This is about, if the education had happened at the front end, instead of bolting off to a settlement, we would definitely not be here today. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Next question, please.
Kāti kia ora tātou. Kia ora tātou e te whakatohea kua tatu mai nei I runga I te reo kranga o tera, ki te whakatatu I tēnei kaupapa e whakahuihui ai tātou I tēnei wā. Nō reira, he mihi kau atu ki a tātou huri noa tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. I'm standing here because I have worked with some of your kuia and kraua in Whakatohea. Boy Biddle, Bill Rewiri, Charlie Aramoana, Josie Mortensen, just to name a few. And their voices are resounding in my head. And I'm talking about working with them, I'm talking about years of working with them. E kore au I te rongo atu, I puta atu, I warātou waha kōrero, me he iwi a te he iwi a upokorehe. Kao, ko tō rātou kōrero, ana ko te upokorehe he hapu o te whakatohea. So I just want to make that statement very clear. I'm a direct descendant to upokorehe. So I'm standing here with my upokorehe hat on, and I share the same great-great-grandmother that Kahukore shares. She's our common ancestor.
And I'm just saying that in the Williams whānau, and there are hundreds of us, I'm here to represent those 100 voices that have said, nā waira e ki, anau ko upokore he iwi o te whakatohea. So my question, based on this very brief context that I've provided, is to tucked. There's nothing that you have presented that, in my view, differentiates you from any other hapu o te whakatohea and the injustices that we have shared as a consequence of Crown actions of the past. So based on that, you know, I'm mystified by the claim that Tucked is making on, in relation to a mandate to withdraw from this settlement. And I'd like a response to that. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, I'd like Tākere to respond to that. Tukt would like Tākere to respond to that.
O kia ora tātou I tēnei rangi, ka mihi kia koutou kai te pai, kai taku pāpā, koro Deni o tira kia koe te kāhautu o tira, kia ku pāpā, kia ku rangatira, e noho nei ki runga I nei tūru ki mua nei, no reira tēnā tātou. Ka hoki aku kōrero, e whiwhiu haere nei I tēnei ingoa Charles Aramoana ki runga I te papa. E nā ka mea atu koe e te papa e tū, he hono ngā tāua, o tira, e kia nei o tira he kōrero anō tā tētahi o ngā uri no kutarere, ana tēnā koe, e mea atu nei, e whiwhiu haere nei tēnei ingoa Charles Aramoana. Ka hoki ake au ki tēnei. In the states in here, from Charles Aramoana, and it is on paper, kia mōhio mai tātou. In his own brief evidence filed in relation to the Y1092 claim, Mr. Charles Aramoana states that he felt he had no choice but to say that Tūpokorehe was a hapu o Whakatohea. That was because the Crown had designated Tūpokorehe as such when it established the Whakatohea Māori Trust Board. However, Kahukore Baker asserted that Aramoana's concerns that the Crown has swept us under the petticoats of te Whakatohea. So koina tāku hei whakautu ki tāhauna pātai.
Kia ora. My suggestion as we go around the room is for those who are participating, especially for the next tui, I think the question that was asked by Tu was what is it that differentiates the hapu from others? And I think that it would be useful to ponder that question and then be able to respond when you're ready to do so, probably at the next tui. Can we carry on with our pātai, please? Next.
Kia ora tātou. Ko hura hau, native assessor for my family. And is it wise to say that a settlement is to settle the breaches? That's my pātai.
Is that a pātai for the Crown?
Settles the historical claims. You know, there are claims that we acknowledge are breaches of te tiriti. There are claims that we that are still claims that we think don't rise to the level of breach, but they all get settled, yes. And then the purpose is to provide redress for those breaches and to settle them.
Right. Another question is, Wairō been implicated into the settlement as myself from Kahununu? I believe Y1551 has been put into the claim.
I'm sorry, I don't have that in my head. I can't speak to that right now, but if you want to have a chat afterwards, I can give you my contact details and we can provide some information on that.
Are you aware of customary rahui that carrying on today that's being done in the rohe of from Ōpape to Mara Tōtara. Are you aware that today people practice their rahui rights? And these rights are the ones that are on the map. Do you agree? On the designated areas for hapu, that those hapu, rahui, their areas, and only their areas. Would you believe that's true?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what hapu map you're referring to.
To all of them. We all have our rahui. When there's a person who drowns, we all set our rahuis in our individual hapu. Did you know that?
I know that, yeah, rahui are set by tangata and their
sites, those sites match the maps put together by TUT. We're talking about overlapping. You talked about overlapping title, and that there isn't. When it comes down to rahui, people stick to their boundaries. That's happening today. The question was, did you know that?
I understand. So the people are putting down customary rahui. That's there. I think this process is the first time where we've actually seen a map get presented to the iwi that says this is what Tūpukurehe Treaty Claims Trust thinks Te Whenua Tūturu of Tūpukurehe is. And so this is the first time that's come forward. It's been presented in forum, like around the Maka and in the tribunal, but this is the first time it's been exposed to everyone else to see. And I think that's why there's a lot of angst from people around what's being represented there. Because it hasn't come about from a kōrero and an agreement amongst the hapu. It's just a claim. Yeah.
Okay, kia ora tātou.
That's
Kia ora tātou. That's a lot of questions from you, Matua, and I understand your point, and I think you're raising a point that's been well heard by the people. So I'm just going to ask you to hand the microphone on to the next speaker to ask a pātai, please.
Ko Quinn Kingi Taitapanui. My question is to Tut, and I, as an up-and-coming kaitiaki, I respect and hold a high mantle for people practicing kaitiaki and their rights as kaitiaki. I want to acknowledge that this is a mamai government process that we're going through whānau. And so my question is to Tut is, Trevor Ransfield, how long have you done pipi monitoring, Kiwi Trust, and kaitiakitanga around the Ohiwa Harbour?
Probably over 30 years, and with the Kiwi Trust over 10 years, going on to 10 years. And does that answer your question?
I look at you like Buck Shelford, and why Buck Shelford was so famous was he led from the front. Nō reira, kia ora koutou.
And you're dead right, and a great All Black player.
Kia ora, everybody. Tēnā koutou. So just explaining where we're at, we've got one more pātai, and then we're going to hand it over to our speakers to conclude with any short statement before kai. So who's our final kai pātai?
Kia ora, ko te hemi ara mone hill tōku ingoa no Tūpukurehe. Kia ora. Maui, you just mentioned that you alluded to the fact that the Maka was a secret service and that what we published was only for a certain few. Can you clarify why you said that?
Jimmy, what I said was that the information that had been provided into those forums was only really known about people that were involved in that process. So the map that was being put forward that that people haven't seen, this is the first time that it's been put out more so that the rest of Whakatohea can see that this is the sort of statement that is being made. And that's what I said.
Because that sort of alludes to the fact that we've only just put it out now. But Maka was over a 2-year period. And there was a lot of evidence from a lot of hapu that put their kōrero on the table. Now, while that happened, Ngā Te Awa were able to put their kōrero on the table, Tua Wāhi Tapu, Whakatohea put their kōrero on the table, it's about 15 Wāhi Tapu. When Tūpukurehe put their kōrero on the table, it was the first time we put our kōrero on the table. We had to do it in order to tell people who's who in the zoo here. and you understand that we put 130 wāhi tapu on the table in that process, and we only gave half, because most of the kōrero that's been used against us is the kōrero that we've put out. Nobody else has known anything about upukorehe, and that's why our whānau, and especially our kaumātua, have not mentioned anything in books, have not told anybody. And Bruce Poke, your dad, in his kōrero on the Whakatohea Pre-Settlement Claims Trust, acknowledges Uncle Wally and our cousin Lance, Aramona, o Reha, as the knowledge holders of te upukorehe. So, you know, yeah, so this is another process where we're being very careful, and for all those whānau that are really don't know where the hell they stand in this, all I say is have a karakia and do your research, come and find out who the knowledge holders are, who the real knowledge holders are, and go back prior to 1952 Trust Boards Act. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Tēnā koutou. I'm not sure that needs an answer. It's from a kōrero from the petitioners there, and thank you for that, Jimmy. What I'm going to do now is suggest that we... Maui, I didn't want to cut you off, but that was not really a question there. I was going to ask you now to stand, though, and have you, then Jacob, and then Te Upukorehe have about 2 minutes max to make any final concluding statements you wish to make, and then we'll go to our kaumātua for a karakia.
All right. Kia ora, Leo. Well, they sort that. Okay. Yes, I'll just make a quick comment. So there's nothing about this process that is, and these processes being involved in, that are saying anything about what our wāhi tapu are and what our places are, because they're known and they sort of sit there. What this has ended up being about is about what represents a claim by a group that is saying that they're representative of a hapu to an area which extends beyond what other people generally feel like is sort of reasonable. So, and this comes about, when we try and think about how do we cut our rohe up, how do we cut ourselves up? When we were engaged in the settlement process, and the settlement process, even the 6 years which the pre-settlement trust done, that wasn't the beginning of it. This hasn't just been the 6 years. It was the 20 or 30 years before that when we went to try and go through the settlement the first time. And who was all involved then? And what did they say was the Whakatohea settlement and the parts of it? The 6 hapu of Whakatohea. They were there. Those krau at that time said this is the right thing for us to do on the basis of how we understand ourselves and what we know. And all we're doing is continuing with what they've said. Now, the raru which emerges, and I agree with Jimmy in that essence, it's really hard to understand where all this thing sits, but it comes about as soon as we try and cut ourselves up. When we talk about ourselves as Whakatohea and that rohe, we know we can get all the rawa back to us and then we work it out. Just like it's happened with the Maka space, all the hapu ended up coming together. What they didn't say is, now that it's been shared with everyone, you actually have to create an entity to be representative. So all of the kōrero about being able to act independently without something over the top of you, actually that's not right. Because there's always a coming together, and that represents all of us. So I think there's that element of kotahitanga we maintain and rangatiratanga, and that makes it easier for us to understand whakatohea te iwi. That's what we're settling as our people. How we decide to manage things afterwards, that's for us to decide. And what's been put in the settlement is ways for that to happen, so it just doesn't become the mothership does everything and there's no ability for the hapu to also do their own development. But that's what we've learned from looking at other people's settlements. That's been one of the benefits of having to wait 25 years from the last time to get to this point, is we've been able to set it up in a different way. But that different way wasn't cutting off one of our arms or legs, because you do that, that's when things get raru. So, whānau, kia ora. Tautoko ngā kōrero, ā te whakarohea, tuku ngā karakia, and then vote no. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Maui. I'd just like to stand up and say that the representative that's representing the Whakatohea Pre-Settlements Claims Trust, Uncle Bruce, Auntie Josie, who's now passed, and Auntie Muriwai. They were elected at a Kutarere Marae meeting as Te Upokorehe representatives. I'm on that meeting. I'm the treasurer of that marae. I'm there. So a marae to represent Te Upokorehe, you call that the right process? Ka. I like to just let the people know that they were elected at a marae, Kutarere marae, to represent Upokorehe, those three that they're talking about. And those are my uncles and aunties and that. That's to get it straight. We just haven't been heard. We've always been pushed back. We've always been put to the side. It's the time to stand. That's why we are standing and that. So that's where I want to end my korero, and that it hurts everybody. Everybody has a right where they want to be. Everybody has a right to where they want to be, and have a right to who they want to vote for. That's what the process is about, and that. So kia ora. That's my korero.
Kia ora. Kahu, I think is that the end of that presentation in summary. Thank you so much, whānau, everybody, for participating constructively and respectfully. It made our job a lot easier, and it is a big take ahead of you all. I wish you all the best. Thank you for allowing me to participate. Can I hand the rākau to our kaumātua, please, to close our hui. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa.
Nōrana kaupapa e hari ni tēnei aka e tō matu te rangi, koe i tingata nāna me aka, koe anō te whakaputi. Nō reira te matu te rangi, koe upi te atua, awhini nā kōreo e ure nei rata tēnei whare o mātou te reira. Nō reira te matu, ko koe te matu, i nā wā rotoa, kōre pi tō ingo tapu. Amen.